Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the monastery, the open bar of the internet, the world's greatest shit show, and the place where we, the good brothers and sisters of this most holy of temples, seek enlightenment through the drunkest, craziest, and most batshit ways possible. I am your one and only gaming monk, better known as Mildra, and with me I have a returning good brother to the temple, coming back after 3 years with the went back when he was doing the webtoon version of this, now coming out with a Kickstarter that managed to get fully funded in just a couple hours. Congratulations on that, by the way. The one and only Animaine, coming in with Bond of the Blade #1.
Oh my God, I am so glad and so happy to be back in the monastery. We are back in the monastery, we are back in the temple, and it feels good to be back, Mildred. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for that dope intro, man. Like I pride myself on my intros, but that one was pretty freaking good. That was pretty good.
Yeah.
You covered like all the bases.
Yeah, I've been doing that kind of intro for about 5 years now. And even beyond that, they've something that will always amuse me is people thinking that I got my style from watching Joe Rogan or something like that. Also, hey there, John A. Douglas, I see you with all the hollers.
Shout out.
But in truth, my influence when it comes to that style and that introduction style was actually morning radio in my local area. You know, guys like Tom Bernard and Dark Star.
Yep, I can definitely hear the heavy the radio influence, and I am also cut from a similar cloth where hearing a lot of radio DJs and people with morning shows and whatnot, that was a heavy influence on me. And actually I was like, hey, I might want to do that one day, and that was before YouTube even came out. So
Yeah.
our roots are in like the classicest variety. Like you got to go back to, like, I don't know, vaudeville or like Carney Barker days to get more true for like this type of entertainment and showmanship.
Well, I did do the Who's on First routine, and well, Abbott and Costello got their start in Vaudeville, so you're not far off.
Yep.
But yeah, it's been about 3 years since I last had you on. Around that time, Bond of the Blade was in a prequel form on Webtoon, and now you're doing a full-on issue 1.
Mm-hmm.
So, but I think before we even get into all of that, there's a bit of catch up that needs to be done. And obviously I could tell people to just go into the last interview, but I suppose I'll start with where the threshold came along, where you're like, where this came from. Okay, this is just something I'm kicking around, to I'm fucking doing this. Walk me through that moment.
Yeah, sure. So if we want to go way back, we can go all the way back to my college days of like the late 2000s, early 2010s, and that was the true genesis of Bond of the Blade. Before it had a name, it was just like a thought experiment that I wrote down some character ideas for, of like, what would the last like 6 years of my life be like if it were an anime that had a lot of video game elements? And a lot of the characters started off as just like composite characters of real people that I knew, and some of them are still like that.
Mhm.
But after I got out of college and I was just out here working, living my life, I got into the fan fiction scene. So I was writing a bunch of fan fiction. And around 2019, I had written about 3 different full-length fan fiction like series, quote unquote. And I looked at all the files and stuff on my computer of all the stuff I'd written. I'm like, I am literally dedicating my free time and my creativity to stuff I can never really use. Like elements from it I can lift out and take somewhere else, but I can't say, hey, here's this 3-part epic based off this obscure game from the 90s. Let's, can I buy, people want to buy this or something? And I remembered, hey, I have this entire series that I was planning just for bullshit reasons like 10 years ago. Why don't I actually give that a spin? So I
Hmm.
started fleshing that out, started reading it to people, showing them what I had and everything. And everyone kept saying the same thing. Where's the comic book? Where's the anime? Why isn't this exist yet? So I thought, yeah, why doesn't this fucking exist? So I taught myself how to write from the ground up, like how to actually write,
Hmm.
and then I had to relearn that from a comic perspective. I met my main artist, Goichi Monji, shout out to him,
Hmm.
who we've been working together for, just a little bit longer than it's been since my first time being on this channel,
Hmm.
so shout out to him. And I started getting all the art made. I was also getting back on Twitter. I had revitalized my YouTube channel at the time, and I was like, let me use this growing platform I have to let people know that I'm writing something, and you remember how I was at the time. I was
Yeah.
very vocally disgruntled with the mainstream entertainment industry, all types of wokeness and just corporate schlop being shoveled down our gullets constantly. And I'm like, I
Hmm.
can do better than this. So I started promoting it, and it started off as like a webtoon, like you said. There was what we call the mini arc, which is the
Hmm.
50 pages of the literal first introduction story wise of the world to the heretics, Ashira, and all that.
Would
And
would you say that
go
that
ahead.
mini arc would be the equivalent of a issue 0 in a regular comic?
Yes, that is exactly what it is. It is issue 0.
Hmm.
And knowing that it is so old is both refreshing and scary, because like I sometimes I still want to point people to it, because like it's 50 pages for free that you can read. It's on, excuse me, it's on a couple different platforms.
Hmm.
It's on Tapas, it's on Global Comics. You can read it right now. But both in terms of writing and Goichi Monji's art, things have progressed so much that I'm almost like, I want to show people where we are now, but I'll let them know there's something else if they just want to get their feet wet before issue 1 starts fulfillment and everything. But like, we've gone so far beyond that in both of our skill levels that like that old stuff, like if you like think of the pilot episode of your favorite show and then think about how it was when it actually first came out,
Yeah.
and like a lot of that stuff is just like, wow, it's like night and day.
I
But yes, it is very much an issue 0.
Yeah, and I look at putting it on Webtoon as the modern equivalent of what of the ballsy ass move Valiant did with the original Unity, if you're familiar with that story.
Refresh my memory, please.
So Unity wasn't the first event comic. As far as what the first event comic is, that's debatable.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of ones that could make the case for being the first. It's like, what was the first heavy metal band? Um,
Mm-hmm.
there's a bunch of ones that are certainly early, but you're not going to find the one because that's not how this works. But Unity, as far as being this big multi-character thing, was the big thing that Valiant had done, and as a way to introduce people to the concept, because this was very early on in Valiant's run, issue 0 was free.
Mm-hmm.
And that was considered a very, very ballsy move, because the idea of free comics up until that point were the kind of thing that you would only see at like pamphlets or special events at conventions, not something that you would see for free at um retailers, newsstands, and all that kind of thing. So it was a massive gamble, but the idea was have that in there to get people's feet wet as to the concept,
Right.
and it ended up being a massive success. Oh, there's a whole documentary that should be made on the history of Valiant, just because I feel like over the years Valiant's kind of not gotten the respect that it's due. Uh, Simply because it wasn't as spicy as, say, Image was. But
Yeah, unfortunately.
but with that in mind, I'd like to bring up a concept that I've brought up in tabletop design that I do think is appropriate here, and that is what's known as Appendix N. Now, Appendix N first showed up in like very early D&D as this collection of other media to use as inspiration, influence, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
This can be things like games, films, not novels, um, TV shows, etc. For Bond of the Blade, what would be some of the media that you'd say would fit into that Appendix N?
For that, I would definitely say we gotta throw in Yu Yu Hakusho.
Hmm.
Definitely have to throw in Yu Yu Hakusho. That was a humongous, like, not only is that my favorite shonen anime, like that Dragon Ball and Dragon Ball Z hold such a huge place in my heart. But when I was in middle school and discovered Yu Yu Hakusho, I was like, oh, it's a whole new world out here.
Hmm.
So definitely that. Since we're also back in the 2000s, we got to shout out the Boondocks,
Hmm.
which many people would classify as a Western anime. At the very least, obviously, it's an anime inspired, Western cartoon,
Hmm.
and that served as the first time. Not only was the show so good, especially seasons 1 and 2, and the writing for that so good, so funny, it's great, satire and social commentary. But that was the first time I had seen black people drawn in an anime style that looked pure, like it was pure shonen energy anime, but it
Hmm.
was also well drawn black people. Like this was the early 2000s. Before that, we're blessed to have a lot of the really dope anime we have now that also draws people with melanin in it really well. But back in those days, as a Westerner, most of our frames of reference for black folks in anime, you were lucky if you were like a really diehard anime fan. You might be familiar enough with I want to say Robotech with Claudia from that.
Yeah,
Like,
we talked a fair bit about the Macross stuff, and well, it's funny you mentioned that since I'm running a Robotech campaign on Saturdays. uh, small world, I suppose. Also, fuck Harmony Gold.
yeah. Oh yeah, I saw you. You have that. I saw you did that a minute ago, and yes, fuck Harmony Gold. But
Hmm.
but yeah, that was on the good side. Otherwise, you were like talking about like, you know, shout out to the ancestor Akira Toriyama, but like his designs for black folks back in the day, they did not age well. And or like Cowboy Bebop, but those were like the exceptions,
Hmm.
and so seeing black folks in an anime style drawn by or designed by black people and people who are far more familiar with like black hairstyles, black, proportions for the way we look at things. But it was just like, this is us and our culture as well and everything front and center, but it was still in that pure anime aesthetic. That was heavy for me. Um,
What
and a
did you
lot
think
of
of
video
What
games.
did you think of Takashi Okazaki's designs?
Um, you're gonna have to show me those for
Do you
me to
remember
see
Afro
a.
Samurai?
Yes.
That
Okay.
was
Yeah.
him.
Yeah. 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 I got you. Yep. See that's another one. That's another one. Yeah. So you
And
got your Afro Samurai. You got your ones from Cowboy Bebop.
mhm.
Um. Yeah. Afro Samurai is definitely one of those outliers where you're almost like, should this exist? But it's
I
one.
was back then, and even today, the argument I had was this was inevitable,
Mm-hmm.
it was only a matter of when it was going to happen, because I consider this the Earth. Osamu Tezuka, his
Mm-hmm.
designs were heavily inspired by Disney animation,
Yeah.
and there's always been a degree of cross culturalism. I mean, Stanley was the one who really pushed for that partnership with Toei, which is how we got Supaida Man, and we were supposed to get a tokusatsu that was going to focus on the Avengers, but that didn't happen, and that got repurposed as Battle Fever J.
Okay.
You have the fact that Todd McFarlane had talked about how Akira was one of the main influences for him wanting to do the Spawn animation. So
Mm-hmm.
that sort of crossover is just how art works. And as time goes
That's
on, and
true.
as more stuff gets exposed, you're going to see more of it. I knew eventually you were going to see whole generations of people who were not born in Japan but gravitated towards that style that was born out of the Gekiga movement of the 70s, and the results were going to be inevitable. You're going to have manga that were made by people who were not in Japan.
Yep.
And
Very true.
when that debate was going on, this was when stuff like Teen Titans and Avatar were starting to make headway. And there was that debate
Yes.
about whether or not it counts as anime. And my answer was always it only doesn't count if you treat anime as a genre. Anime, much like animation, is a medium. And
Mm-hmm.
to say that it's a genre is like saying that a brand of paint is a genre. It is a
Right.
it is a means to it is a means to express. Can genres spring from it? Yes, but that's no saying that anime is a genre is like saying that is like saying that that a theater is only showing a genre of films. Like that doesn't narrow it down much. It's a wide ass net.
Big ass net, exactly. And
And
I'm sorry,
although
go ahead.
whenever it comes to portraying African Americans or just international folk in Japan, especially in the 2000s, my mind always ends up going to Sado Yasutora it from Bleach, aka Chad.
Mm,
I know he's Mexican, but I always envisioned him as like half Afro American, half Mexican.
yeah.
Oh, just be, and yes, the tall guy is biased towards the tall people in a show. What a shock!
Sue me, right. Sue
Uh,
right.
like
Um,
the whole tall guy having to do the heavy lifting. Yeah, I know that feeling.
Yep. But I actually thought to help bring your point home, I actually think about that a lot because that as Mark and Tim from Common America, they often call it the game of Eastern Western tennis, where it's just like we're just hitting the ball back and forth. And that has been going on for so long because like you were saying, I remember, all those cartoons, those early 2000s to 2010s cartoons that were clearly so anime influenced and inspired. Like I used to get mad or like a little disturbed when people would classify them as anime, but honestly, I don't even trip out about it anymore. And especially when it comes to like the fusion of different cultures who become so attached to anime. Like I was when I was before I hopped on with you, I was watching a video about how much of a rabid, beautifully rabid fan base that Dragon Ball has in Latin America. Like how it
Oh
just
yes.
apparently it just blows us out of the water about how crazy they are for Dragon Ball over there.
Oh,
Um
even knowing what I know, I still say that what I know is a vast understatement. And to bring it even more full circle,
mhm.
I have seen quote unquote American cuisine restaurants in parts of Japan.
uh Oh, I know. Ooh, how bad is it? Like, is it like a mixture of like pride and cringe, or like what do you feel when you see that?
Uh, I just laugh because one, it's full circle, and two, it's doing American food with somewhat of a Japanese spin. Like
Mm-hmm.
I I think in one case there was some kind of dish that was using shredded beef instead of ground beef because you're not really going to find ground beef in Japan all that easily.
Mm.
You're not going to find a whole lot of beef period all that easily. That's going to be hard to get. But do I looked at it as another form of fusion style cooking, which is the kind of thing that's been around for centuries. Oh, there's a place near where I live called Chindan that is a fusion of elements between Vietnamese and Indian cooking. Uh,
Oh, nice.
I've been to places like that. I've seen how the doom style of cooking is used in like India and Persia in different areas. Doom is a kind of Indian slow cooking, I guess is the best way for me to put it. It's not as flashy as as other styles, but it's certainly there. Um, and of course,
Okay, because you said doom cooking, and I'm like,
it's spelled D
what?
U M.
Gotcha. Okay. Right. Okay.
Yes,
I'm like doom cooking. Like what? What? My
yeah.
mind just went so many different directions.
And
But yeah, I got you.
and coming from the south, you know how there's varieties and sub varieties for just about everything.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes. Oh my goodness.
mm-mm. Especially if you try and get two people to agree on what the preferred method of gumbo is. The only thing they will agree on is that they will never agree on anything.
Gumbo, barbecue,
Oh, oh God!
grits. Like we'll be here all
The
freaking
only,
day.
and I am a lot blacker than some people think I am, and I am no stranger to soul food. And the only kind of soul food that I am like, if you get that shit away from me, is chitlins. I will.
Yeah, no, I could never really fuck with chitlins. I remember mom cooking that in the home, and I was just like, think I'm gonna go outside and play. No, I don't
Just the
even want to be in
smell
here while you
alone.
cooking it.
Yes,
Can't do it.
I know what it is. That does not help.
It only makes it worse. It only helps make our point
Mm-hmm.
that we don't want to be around it.
No.
But this wonderful fusion of cultures that we're talking about is actually a huge reason why I took Bond of the Blade in the direction that I took it in.
Mm-hmm.
Because just like you were saying, things like Afro Samurai and the Boondocks, all of those are inevitable because it's part of the back and forth game of ball that we've been playing with the East for decades now, and especially as it pertains to the Black community,
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that on the American side, we tend to like attach to it like heavily. Like I remember in the back when it was the samurai movies in the 50s and 60s, and then that became more of like the martial arts films and cultivation films from China and the Bruce Lee led stuff of the 70s into the 80s with Jackie Chan, into the 90s and the craze of ninja and everything,
Mm-hmm.
and to obviously anime and all the stuff coming from video games, and even going into what's currently blowing up from the Korean side of things, like with K dramas, K pop, webtoons in general,
Mm-hmm.
manhwa. Like we're always one of the biggest groups of people that shows up for that stuff. So it makes sense for me to be like, hey, I'm going to have my own take on that. Well, I'm fusing a lot of these things, the martial arts, the anime, the video games, and having that be in my own unique world and having it be a big influence on the art style, a lot of the themes and everything, a fusion of East and West with obvious heavy helping of African and African descended things as well.
Yeah. Now, part of the reason I brought up Okazaki is I believe he was on record that he was vastly influenced by blaxploitation movies, and
Makes perfect sense.
I do know that a lot of martial arts movies back in the '70s were in those same grindhouse theaters that a lot of blaxploitation movies were,
Mm-hmm.
and you have when you have them in the same theater and you have people visiting those theaters almost on a daily basis, like I was doing when I was in high school, where because there was a theater within walking distance, I was going there some sometimes multiple days a week, just going to the 11:30 shows because I knew nobody was gonna bug me.
Yeah.
That and I could sneak into the R-rated movies and nobody'd make a fuss. But you
Of
didn't hear me
course.
say that. But it's that whole cross culturalism, and something that I do want to add onto that is that, as I kind of hinted at, this is not a one sided thing, because obviously Japan's been taking notes from the States and elsewhere for the longest time. I mean, one Swedish actor whose name currently escapes me, ended up being the patient zero for the Bishonen style of manga. Like
Really?
that, and I believe one of the big influences on Miura was Rose of Versailles, which is obviously going to be a very French storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
and it's this mixture. That's why the I was in those old East versus West debates when I was growing up, just like you. But as I've gotten older, I've realized that's something that the fan base has created more than the devs, the creators, and the like. Uh,
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
that
Like
that
I'm
mixture.
sure you've heard it well from the whenever I've heard, and I'm sure that there's Japanese people that feel differently, just as with any given subject, no group feels 100% the same way about everything. But I've often heard from like Japanese people in the industry that all like this, the heavy distinction of anime only being this thing made in Japan by Japanese people for Japanese people, that's something that we put on that. And they don't make that distinction. Like obviously
Let me
there's a
raise you one with
difference
that.
between say what now?
Let me raise you one with that.
Go ahead.
So about a year ago, Yoshi P, the guy behind FF 14's Resurgence and FF 16 with Creative Business Unit 3 in Square, had made the remark about how he doesn't see how nobody in Japan really sees the term JRPG or WRPG in the same way, just looking at them as RPGs. And back in the day, the term JRPG felt exclusionary to a lot of Japanese developers. And I
Mm,
remember seeing that, and I thought validated because I had been saying the same thing for years, that nobody in Japan probably even uses the term JRPG in that sense.
yeah. Like we're the ones that come in and put all these dividers and classifications in. Like you're if you're doing the animation, if you're doing RPGs, role playing games, then or east, west, all that, like whatever makes them distinct, that doesn't mean that they're like completely different things that can't be put together.
Yeah, I've called it
That's
a
just
Great Wall of China style thinking because that's the level of I can't even say that it's segregation in the traditional sense. It's more like full on apartheid the way some people approach it.
mm-hmm.
Uh, this idea that there's this big ass wall that's dividing the two, when that's never been the case.
No, no, and we both caught flack for even acknowledging that when people are like, and I know there may even people listening now who are like, when they think of anime, they think of it as different from Western cartoons. The simplest way I can put it is if you want to treat them differently, then they're like two households.
Mhm.
Like like you have your parents, right? You have the parents have kids. The kids all grow up in that house. Eventually the kids grow up and have their own houses. They have their own households.
Mhm.
They're having their own, and those households will have some of their own traditions, their own customs that they do, but they're also going to carry that shared blood connection as well as a lot of the same traditions and everything that they grew up with.
Yeah.
So if you want to make that distinction, you understand that there's still animation, there's still the same art form. They're just at most different households that are part of the same family.
Yeah.
And to me, looking at it as anything other than that is just getting into a territory that the Japanese definitely, by and large, don't get into. So it's just, and that's, not to get too serious about it,
Mhm.
but some people are just like, that's just how I personally like to look at it, but I don't make a big deal out of it. But some people will go like full blown like anime Nazi about it to a point where you're just literally showing your Western elitism to say that this expression of an art form from another culture that chose to share it with us when
Mhm.
they didn't necessarily need to, and you're gonna say, well, I'm gonna define this other art form from this other culture, and I'm
Imagine
gonna put a label on it that didn't exist before we saw it.
I ended up taking that and turning it on someone's head to make them sound ridiculous. Um, because I told them what you're basically telling me is that is that there should be no reason why baseball is such a massive damn deal in Japan to the point where fans of the Osaka Tigers would be willing to jump into a river after a championship win. And yeah, that did happen.
God damn.
Uh, or the way that well to use that house example, look
Mhm.
at the way wrestling evolved in Japan. It
Yeah.
was very much an import from the states, but eventually you have stuff like the JWF with Ricky Dozan, who was recruiting a lot of sumo for it. Then his top two students, Inoki and Baba, end up forming their own promotions. This is where you get All Japan and New Japan, which had two different philosophies. All Japan having the King's Road philosophy, and New Japan having the Strong Style philosophy. And things just go out from there. Then you get stuff like Dragon Gate, which is bringing in a fair amount of lucha libre into the things, and the explosion of the junior heavyweights in the 90s. Uh, and then in the 2000s, you have the influence that MMA had with like Pride and K1.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and it just keeps, and that's just how the creative process ends up working. This idea of needing to have things in their little cubbyhole, that's actually how you get stagnation.
Right.
Um, in
Exactly.
the
Which
temple, we
is a
call it
huge,
designed by
huge
gospel.
problem. Say that again.
In the temple, we call it designed by gospel.
I like that. Designed by gospel.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I do remember one of the things that I highlighted when I initially talked about it is the fact that of of the trio, um,
Mm-hmm.
the two of them that are using weapons are using ones that would certainly be a bit unorthodox from what people would expect. I mean, Shen's weapon of choice is more of a Chinese straight sword, a jian,
Yep.
rather than like a standard European longsword or anything like that. And Chant's weapon is this half. I was gonna say it's a Sansetsukon, but the staff parts are too short. It's more like a bastard child between that and nunchaku.
Yeah, it's somewhere in between. It's
Mhm,
definitely depending on how it's drawn.
mhm.
It's in my head, it's always been more of the three section staff.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's drawn more as like a nunchucks with three bars instead of two.
Hmm.
Eventually we're gonna reside on what that that actually is. That'll probably happen within this issue. But yeah, and even Vice, he's not often drawn with his weapons because since he's more brute force anyway, but he his tonfa are probably the closest thing to like a conventional weapon that you would see like someone using in this type of environment.
Yeah.
But yeah, Shen rocking the Chinese straight sword and then Chant with the three section staff is definitely like 1000%. And even that is sort of like me crossing Eastern streams because they're definitely, you know, drawn in a sort of like urban ninja attire. But then what is a Shen's weapon? He's not rocking a katana. He's
Hmm.
not running around with a wakizashi or anything like that. He's running around with a Chinese sword,
Hmm.
you
Yeah.
know? I figure why just make it East meets West? Like in a lot of the story, I took a very Avatar Last Airbender esque approach where they would obviously it's all Eastern inspired stuff, but they would cross different cultures within cultures to make something like brand new.
Yeah. And it's funny you mentioned that since obviously here in the temple we did a whole thing where we reconstructed the Legend of Korra. Uh, and one of the big things that I always took away from how Avatar evolved was uh the fact that the bending styles were referencing different real world fighting styles. You know, airbending is referencing Bagua Zhang. Firebending is referencing uh, Northern Shaolin. You know, Toph's earthbending style is referencing Southern Praying Mantis, and it certainly tracks because a lot of Northern Kung Fu is more about reach, and a lot of Southern is more about getting in close. Because in Northern China, you'd have taller people than in Southern.
I did not
I'm
know that.
I'm vastly simplifying the matter, and of course, in the process, it ended up going through the creative mind of me and going, okay, what other styles would fit what bending style? Like I'd said around the time I'd pay good money to see a earthbender that used like Muay Thai.
Yeah, I could see that.
Uh,
I can see that connection.
because earthbenders are very hard hitting and very much focused on being able to hit hard and take hits. And
Right.
with Muay Thai with those elbows and knees, those are all about hard hits. Uh,
Right. It's all about that hard hitting and that sturdiness and everything.
mhm.
Definitely.
But one of the now obviously within the world, auras are a big deal. It is.
Hmm.
I guess you could say it's the equivalent of ki. And since on the
Yep,
Kickstarter you
it is
mentioned
literally that.
each having an aura skill, is that a case of a special technique, or is it a case of something that is inferred throughout their fighting style?
That's definitely more of the like their aura skill is
Hmm.
like that's their umbrella term for like their specific type of powers.
Hmm.
So the easiest example I can go to would be Chant, which hers is the Heretic Shriek. So with her powers, she has audio based powers, which I partially gave her because like in her quote unquote civilian life, she's very talkative. She's a singer. She sings in her church choir and all that,
Hmm.
and she's the most uh one who wants to just establish peace, and she's like the peacekeeper, the one who's going to be more maybe negotiable with people and everything. So that I figured that just translate well to her superpower. But her shriek, it's not just that like she does like a black canary or a Sindel type of like straight up like scream that hurts you. Like she can do that and she does do that. But because these are all spiritual based powers, she can use them in like more creative ways. So like if she's charging her aura, she can hum to herself and like that'll like give her amplified striking power or
Hmm.
something like that. Or she can send out like a soothing sort of like vocalization, and that may help her and her teammates heal faster. Or she could screech in a way that's like strike like cutting power, or
Hmm.
make it dense and have it be more like a concussive blast a la Cyclops from X-Men.
Hmm.
So the fact that it's the aura skill is called the Heretic Shriek, but the shriek itself is applied in different ways based on whatever she's doing. And obviously throughout the story she'll gain different variations of this as she grows as a martial artist, as a hero, and just as a person.
Yeah, and the thing about having those sort of abilities, what
Hmm.
regardless of what form they take, whether it's magic, key, or something in the middle, there's always an importance to have a degree of consistency with with how they're presented.
Hmm.
And would it be fair of me to say that even before you put pen to paper, nailing down what aura is, how it works, what it can and can't do was something that you had established?
Yes. There was, I'd say, probably it was 95% real in my mind before I started, definitely before I started getting it drawn. There were some particulars that I was still figuring out, but I knew that this was going to be my power system. I knew what it meant, where it came from, who could use it, who couldn't use it, how could a person who didn't have access to it naturally, how could they obtain that? How they would interact between different people, which obviously I can only say but so much here because I don't want to spoil things, but you I can say without going into detail that on the very first in the very first scene of issue 1, you learn a very specific way that people's different aura skills can counter each other,
Hmm.
and that will be integral to understanding how various fights go throughout the entire series.
Yeah.
And that was something that I had to know before I got too deep into the writing, because as you understand, because you create characters all the time, you have to understand how these things function on a fundamental level and their limits and everything, or else you're gonna get all the way into chapter 20 and stuff's gonna stop making sense. And before, if you had done the planning and everything, you might say, okay, no, well, this part doesn't make sense. Let me backtrack a little bit, clean it up. If you don't do this, you'll end up, years into what your story is supposed to be, and shit ain't making sense. And in order to make it make sense, you would have to erase like half the story because you've
Yeah,
just been building wrong on top of wrong.
there's been those there's been those particular issues I've seen in multiple works. Somebody who writes a given work and then ends up realizing that they wrote themselves into a corner, and it's a case of either keep writing themselves into a corner or hack off one of their legs. Um,
Right.
I a long time ago, I ended up speaking with someone who had worked on a lot of episodes for a lot of different shows on Nickelodeon. Um, and this was a long ass time ago. And one of the things he had said was the importance of having a series Bible.
Yes.
And for those unaware, a series Bible is basically a document that's meant to have like characters, characterization, world notes, arc notes, basically a unifying document to keep everything consistent. And you would think this would be a non-starter that everybody would have, but there's some folk who definitely don't, and it ends up showing when something comes up that ends up contradicting what came before.
Hmm. And oh my gosh, if it is one of the worst feelings in the world to see, both as a creator and consumer,
Mhm.
especially when you're like on fire for something and you just start seeing stuff come apart at the seams, and you're just like, oh, you didn't write any of this down at all, did you? You just had it in your mind for like 15 years and thought it was good, didn't you?
Yeah. Um,
Gotta get that. You got to have that story Bible, man.
mhm.
It is a must.
And in that same vein, it's important to take notes. One of my favorite producer stories related to Star Trek is the story of Harv Bennett. Harv Bennett was the producer for Wrath of Khan. The best Star Trek
Ah,
movie.
yes, of
Uh,
course.
and when he stepped onto the project, which he was hired because he could maintain a budget, and the first film went massively over budget because of a special effects issue, he had not seen a single episode of Star Trek. So in preparation, he went through the entire original series and
Oh,
took
wow.
took notes throughout regarding what he wanted to go with. Um, and there was one infamous continuity error where, when it comes to the whole thing of Khan recognizing Chekhov, because Chekhov wasn't part of the cast when Space Seed was filmed. The
Mm,
episode where Khan first appears.
mhm.
Um, but in that kind of thing, he laughed it off by saying, "Well, Chekhov was probably a red shirt that made him wait too long for the bathroom." Uh, but then you get stuff like that taking off armor scene in Man of Steel that even to this day bugs the hell out of me. Uh,
Mm,
After establishing that the Kryptonians can't handle that amount of sunlight without freaking out, just because of the sheer amount of sensory data that they end up getting.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, Zod just takes off his armor and he's completely fine.
That's where he achieves final form Zod by doing the thing that before, if you did it, it would just like completely make all your senses just go fucking haywire.
Yeah, and they show
Because
it.
because the plot, it was time. You're like, fuck rules. It's time for the final fight. Break the rules.
Which and the argument he makes was the whole I trained my whole life to master my senses.
Mm-hmm. Where did you train? On
Yeah,
a farm? Yeah, well, bet they got continuity on the farm.
yeah, but I did a whole thing where I ended up lambasting Snyder and talking about how Rebel Moon was something that he's not going to be able to recover from.
Mm.
Um, but the thing, and I know a lot of people will make DBZ jokes regarding that, but even Toriyama was better at lamp shading things. I mean, the whole concept of the Super Saiyan was lampshaded when Goku arrived on Namek.
Mm-hmm.
The form thing the idea of form changing had already been lampshaded up until that point. I'd say you kind of got a hint of that with Zarbon having his ugly ass form,
Right.
but
Beauty and the oh my fucking god, kill it with fire.
yeah. So it's a case of if you're gonna be doing that kind of thing, you have to hint at it beforehand. Um,
Yeah,
but
definitely. You got to lay the groundwork for this stuff. Like especially with things like Dragon Ball, like those things are this it's always going on and it's ever evolving, and I applaud Akira Toriyama because with him being such a pants eater when it comes to writing, but having the good sense to lay the groundwork for things that he can build upon. Cuz like for me planning this stuff out, which I do have, several years worth of story planned out already, but there are some things that I'm going to leave, relatively open to where as I get closer to it I can fill in some of the blanks. But a lot of this shit I'm like, okay, I know this character is going to become relevant at this point. This ascension form, this new fighting style is going to be unlocked. So I need to start laying the seeds for this in issue 1, issue
mhm.
2, issue 3, because I don't want to get to those issues and have stuff come out and everyone think it's an ass pull. Even if it looked like an ass pull, it got to at least be an ass pull that you can say, "Oh, okay, well at least I see where this started, where the pulling started."
Yeah,
You know
or at the very least, if it is an ass pull, you can make it look like you had that plan the whole time. I mean,
exactly.
that's half of the time that's what Oda does. I think.
Oh my god, yeah,
Um,
definitely.
so I think he hinted that the sole reason that he did Gear 5 was because he wanted to draw something Tom and Jerry like.
Man, the amount of times that stuff like that happens in manga and anime is absolutely, it is both surprising and not very surprising and also refreshing,
Mhm.
because like sometimes do you ever get that feeling of like you're writing and you're like, man, what the hell am I even doing? But then you look at some of the biggest writers and they're just like, no, I kind of just made this. Everyone is watching it thinking it has some really deep relevance when it was really like, nah, there was this cool like Bugs Bunny cartoon I saw when I was 5 and I always wanted to reference this one part, and so I did it. And it becomes like the thing that defines the whole fucking series. Or like with Toriyama and his infamous, well, I just didn't want to have to keep coloring Goku's hair for Super Saiyan.
Pretty much. Uh,
So that's where we got
yeah,
Super Saiyan from.
yeah. I can well. Even in the Legend project I've been working on. There's been cases of that of me just putting in something in there because I wanted to.
Mm-hmm.
The example I always go to is one of the jobs in the job system is the Chocobo Knight. And I put it in there because I was like, why haven't we had a lance charge with chocobos?
A Lance charge of Chocobo. I have never used that sequence of words before, but now I kind of want to see it.
A lance charge with a lance charge with with chocobos instead of horses, or just the kind of jousting tournament that you would see in any Ren fair ever.
Right.
Just with chocobos instead of horses. I'm like, why haven't we had that? It's shown up in concept art, and there was the whole Chocobo Knights thing in 10, but nothing in a playable sense. So I'm like, screw it, I'm gonna put it in there.
Fine, I'll do it myself.
Yeah. The other big one was the Magitech Knight. Originally, that was going to be with the big platforms that you see in FF6. Then I looked at it and like, this isn't gonna work. Not for the goals that I have. And then I shifted it around to be more in the realm of powered armor, and especially since I think right around that time, I was watching the way Anthem was turning out and being disappointed because it was such a strong concept that just wasn't fully realized. So I was like, all right, if they're not going to do it, then I will. And that there was the inevitable result. And of course, the third one was the Dervish, which was just because I wanted a berserker that was more speed based instead of strength based.
That also sounds like one of those concepts that when you say it out loud, you're like, why have we never gotten this before now?
Yeah.
Well, just because you haven't made it yet. Sometimes shit just ain't been done yet because you ain't done it yet.
Mm-hmm. And I've often told people to stop over worrying about how original a given concept is because everybody's ripping off from somebody.
God. There is nothing new under the sun, people. And not only that, but especially being very familiar with the indie writer and indie comic scene, and I'm sure you've seen this a lot too. The more effort people put into trying to be super original, they often kill the potential that their idea could have had because they're like, now, yeah, it's original and there's nothing out there like it. And it doesn't appeal to anybody and it doesn't make sense to people. And you can't make it make sense because you've put all your energy into having it be different.
Yeah,
So different, no one wants to fucking buy it.
I've even seen this in the tabletop gaming scene.
Oh yeah, I can imagine.
Somebody developing a given project and not want and their mindset is I don't want to be X. I'm like, in the pursuit of not wanting to be X, you have not answered the question of what you actually want to be. Like when I would see a bunch of people who were like, I want to make something that is not like D&D 5e. They're like, okay, what? And don't tell me go back to the old days because that's not a solution.
Thank you.
Like the analogy I use is to look at the wave of boomer shooters we've gotten in the last 5 years. They're not stopping with just being a shooter like something that came out of the 90s. That's the starting point to establishing the identity. And I think a lot of people when they hyper focus on being original, they end up forgetting that at the end of the day, you have to still write a story.
Exactly.
Plus, nobody who creates is really thinking about originality like that. So it's one of those things that's more born from fandom or fan dumb, if I want to be honest, than than anything else.
Fandom.
Yeah. It's also the reason why I've said calling something a blank ripoff or a blank clone is the laziest way to approach something. But one of the things that I couldn't help but notice when it came to Aura, and I'm pretty sure this was a somewhat intentional, somewhat unintentional thing, is the use of color.
Yeah, and specifically, what do you mean? Like, do you think the colors like what they represent, or what do you mean by that?
That in some I'm not gonna say that there's certain rules for different colors of aura, unless that is the intention, in which case I just accidented my way into that. But more in the sense that the use of color is reflective of characters' personalities.
Yep, that was very intentional. That
Mhm.
was very intentional. I chose everyone's aura is definitely a look into their personality, their state of mind, the way they fight, even. So, like, Vice, because he is the most violent and brute force of the group,
Mhm.
giving him the red aura made the most sense.
Mhm.
Um, versus Shen, who he has the not just the blue but the light blue, like his. And the main reason why I gave him the blue aura is because his shade of blue is very close to the color that Ashira has in her ghost form, and since she is directly bonded to him first and foremost, that's more like to signal the fact that they're very in sync in that way.
Mhm.
And so basically everyone's color of their aura tells you a little something different about them.
Yeah,
Definitely.
I can certainly get that. Now, I know that you had also mentioned putting in a 7-page additional story focused on Shen. Uh,
Mhm.
was that a story that you had been developing during the webtoon era, or was the writing for that something a little bit more recent?
That actually is something that I debuted on webtoon, but I'm going to be revamping a good amount of it specifically for this issue. So if you've read it on the as the webtoon version, that's not what's going to be in the book 100%. Like, a lot of that is going to have new art and is going to have some changes to make it'll still be telling essentially the same thing but in a different way. Because I always like the idea of the fact that all the heretics, they have different reasons for doing what they do, and being able to communicate that um without necessarily taking up main issue retail has always been something that appealed to me. Like, I want you guys to know why they are like they're doing this, but I didn't want to do like an origin issue
Hmm.
because I felt like that would like hold things up unnecessarily. Like, I can tell you guys this as we go throughout the story. So I plan on doing that for all three original heretics, as well as for a few other characters as well.
Hmm. Yeah, I can certainly get that. Well, with that in mind, I know it's currently funding right now. It's at um 1,523, which is 3 times over what the initial goal was, and you still got 24 days. Uh,
Yeah.
but what would you be shooting for as far as a release window? Not a date per se, and I know there's the estimated delivery on Kickstarter, but
Mhm.
just a ballpark.
Yeah, so basically how this is gonna go, since I mean, obviously I've long since clear shot past the goal. Like you said, funded in just over an hour. This has been up for a week and it's already made 3 times its goal.
Hmm.
We're gonna be looking to resume production on the interiors as soon as this campaign wraps up and I get the funds in my bank account. And just judging by the I already know how long roughly it's going to take for my team to get it finished. So yeah, we're definitely looking at digitally, we're definitely looking at that February 2025 release. Physical side, I say no later than March, like early March, to fulfill for that. Anything past that would be due to like unforeseen circumstances that I would be communicating, on to all my backers and on
Hmm.
social media and everything. But yeah, definitely by the end of the first quarter of 2025, everyone should have their stuff
Hmm.
unless something goes absolutely haywire.
Yeah.
And
The
it more than likely won't be like on the art production side, because like I've already committed, like my art team is already committed to taking care of that, again, outside of like literal emergencies. And we've already gone ahead and mapped out exactly how long it would take to do this many pages in this amount of time. what we would need to do faster than that, what we would have to how much time we should allow ourselves as like a buffer just in case something does happen,
Mhm.
which is part of why I've spaced it out so much. So like, now that we have enough more than enough time that we need to get it done, in a reasonable amount of time.
Oh yeah, I can certainly get that. Well, with all of that said, I do want to sincerely thank you for taking the time out of your schedule to come all the way to my temple. I hope it's not another 3 years before I bring you back in.
Absolutely, man. And not to harp on this too much because I know we're wrapping up here, but life for me has been all over the place. You know a good bit about this. I basically describe like the last 3 to 4 years of my life as just a constantly raging fire. Sometimes the flames are just up to the door frame. Sometimes they're up like halfway up the door, and sometimes it's just the whole house just literally is flames. But now that they've started to go out a good bit, I do plan on, reestablishing a lot of the social connections that I've made, like with you, like with, some of the people who are in the chat room right now, even because I like you're cool people, Mildred, and like I I wish I could have been more present in all the various communities I'm involved in over the past 3 years, but I've hit a point where I can breathe. And I think even if stuff starts to go off the rails again, I'm gonna try really hard to keep these relationships nice and strong. Cause like it's hard to come across good people and cool people, especially in these digital streets. So when you meet someone who's cool like you definitely want to foster that relationship and keep it nice and strong.
Mhm.
So I agree. All that to say, I agree. I definitely don't want to wait another 3 years before I'm back in your temple.
Yeah. Well, and of course, anytime you see fit to return, the door is always open. As I often say around here, drinking is not mandatory, but it is encouraged.
Well, next time I probably will have a little drinky drink with me. Tonight I was on the sober kick. But yeah, drinking, we get some nice drinks going around here. Pour me some nice mead, some communal mead, and come through.
Yeah, just
and have a good time.
just no absinthe. I don't want another incident.
No, promise we won't have none of that.
I don't do absinthe. I don't fuck with Everclear. That stuff's nasty.
No Everclear. No, I tried that once. I'm good.
But and of course, a sincere thanks goes out to everyone who took the time out of their schedule to come onto the show and enjoy the madness. And there will be plenty more where that came from, as there always is here, on the open bar of the internet. But until then, on behalf of the good brothers present and not present, my name is Mildra. I am your gaming monk. Stay fucking frosty, everybody.